Good morning, Revolution, everybody, and welcome to our stream. Good morning, Anita. Good morning, Cameron, and good morning, Scott Hiley. Cameron, welcome back. Very happy to see you. Cameron is a labor educator, just to remind everyone. And Cameron, you're working on an upcoming labor conference, I understand, in Chicago. How's that going? And what is going to be
It's
taken
going
up there?
it's going well. I'm excited to see all the comrades there. We're going to have the largest number of trade unionists and workplace activists that we've ever hosted in Chicago for this conference. So we're looking forward to it. And I think we're holding the conference this year under very severe circumstances. Almost 1.3 million federal workers' collective bargaining rights have been axed or about to be axed. And we got to figure out how to mobilize the working class and the trade union movement to adequately respond to the crisis, both economic and political, in our country.
So this is a good subject. It's fitting that we're talking about today. Before we get started, speaking about the working class and this leadership, today is the birthday of Amilcar Cabral. And Amilcar Cabral was from a country in West Africa called Guinea-Bissau and Cape Verde, and he was the leader of the national independence movement in that country and more broadly on the African continent. One of my heroes, Comrade Cabral, and one of his uh, most famous statements is tell no lies, claim no easy victory. So happy birthday, Comrade Cabral. Today, we are streaming on Twitch, on X, on Facebook, and here on YouTube. And as I said last week, we are trying to get to 15,000 subscribers on YouTube. Last week, we had 14,782. 82. This week we have 14,785. We only got three new subscribers last week. Come on, y'all. If you like what you see, please subscribe to the channel. Do you know that one of the longtime viewers and producers and contributors to this program just signed up last week? That comrade hadn't done it. I know he's been participating in this show for 2 or 3 years. Sometimes you don't think about it. So please, if you're a follower, if you're a member of the party, if you're a supporter of the party, if you're, I don't like that word, but I'll say it anyway, fellow traveler, please subscribe to the channel. Share it with a coworker. Share it with your partner. Share it with your family. Share it with your neighbor. But whatever you do, please share it. What are you waiting on? Hurry up. We're trying to get to 15,000. Our subject today is the world ideological crisis and the working class, or perhaps we should say its impact on the working class. And by ideological crisis, we mean the impact or influence of bourgeois ideology on the working class movement. But that wasn't always the case. One time, Lenin, in the early part of the 20th century, in an article, said that the Marxism had gained complete victory in the European working class movement. Complete victory. Um, and that's a huge thing. Uh, the trade unions, the working class in Europe were under socialist influence, quite different from the United States. I remember one time Gus Hall observed that the United States was the only country on the planet that had a working class who, in their majority, were influenced by capitalist ideology. That is to say, we're pro capitalist, you know? Scott, let's start with you. Number one, do you agree with my definition of the crisis? Um, and if so, when did it start?
Oh,
1900, 1914, um, 1956, and Khrushchev's speech at the 20th Congress? Or was it 1985 when that renegade Gorbachev became the general secretary of the CPSU and initiated the uh, reforms, which were actually deforms, that he called perestroika and glasnost? Thoughts?
wow. So that's an easy question. No, I want to start by saying I saw we had a comment from a viewer in Brazil. I just want to say congratulations to the democratic and progressive forces in Brazil on the huge victory of getting Bolsonaro locked up for 27 years for trying to overthrow for a coup. Um, let's hope the working class and people of this country follow their example. Um, so when did this? I do agree about this ideological crisis, the influence of bourgeois ideology under many different forms. Whether it's um, sort of reactionary right wing racism and ethno nationalism, whether it's sort of liberalism and the erasure of class struggle. All of all of that is an enormous problem. Um, I don't know when it began. I'm not enough of a historian, I guess, to answer that question. But I would say that we have to keep in mind that not to take an idealist approach to ideology, right? That it's not just that there are these ideas and people fall under their influence. Um, there's a very concerted campaign, billions, trillions, in fact, over the last century, have been poured into um, articulating anti working class ideas and shoving them in front of working class people in every possible opportunity at the same time that communist and socialist ideas are discredited and communists and socialists are driven out of the trade union movement. We're beginning to emerge from that period. Red baiting and anti-communism aren't as severe as they used to be, but this struggle against bourgeois ideology is also a struggle against the concentration of capital that makes it possible for the capitalist class to try and impose its way of thinking on working people, and that concentration of capital is just getting bigger and bigger.
Well, yeah, Scott, but the concentration of capital wasn't responsible for the influence of Edward Bernstein on the European working class movement. Um, was it? And that's why I chose those dates, because we saw in the latter part of the 19th century the influence of revisionism, right opportunism, started to make its impact felt in the working class movement internationally, and it just got worse from there. And then you had that split during World War One, and so on and so forth. And so it seems to me that it's important to think about when it happened, how it happened, and who was responsible for it, which is not to absolve the bourgeoisie and the concentration of capital. Anita, do you agree with Gus that the working class movement in the United States was the only working class movement in the world that was pro capitalist? Or was Gus responsible for some form of American exceptionalism in making that argument? Um, what do you think?
Well, I think he was correct, and it is a form of American exceptionalism in a way that I mean, I in studying European history, I always was uh, learned that that working people in Europe, especially in the 20th century, had identified as workers. I remember being in Germany in the 1970s and hearing people define themselves. What do you do? What's your occupation? And they would say, "I'm a worker." And that wasn't something we heard in the United States. I think the United States does have some unique characteristics, and one of them is this embrace of capitalist ideology on the part of a large section of the working class. And I think it is something that is, as Scott said, cultivated by the bourgeoisie. But I think those ideas of introducing a false consciousness into the working class goes back to the very beginning of industrial capitalism. I'm thinking about the ruling class ideas in the German ideology. The idea that the bourgeoisie can define terms like freedom, um, and it's accepted. Their definition is accepted by large sections of the working class. So I think it goes back right to the beginning. I think there's always been an effort to not only dominate the working class with economic means and political means and coercion, but also this ideology that tries to get the working class to buy into its own oppression and buy into its own exploitation and accept it as possible. One of the ways they do that is this idea that aspirations, people can aspire to become, you know, pull themselves up by their bootstraps and become the next, Horatio Alger stories that people start out working class and then they suddenly become part of the ruling class. That idea that that's possible is was introduced early on, I think, in industrial capitalism.
The ruling ideas of any given period are the ideas of the ruling class. That was Marx and Engels and the German ideology. Uh, okay, look, Cameron, you're a student of history. What's your opinion? What confluence of circumstances led to what you might call the ideological bourgeoisification of the U.S. labor movement? Is that too strong a term? Was it the so-called Brother Riley? Comrade Riley just said on the screen that the U.S. working class was bribed, they bought off, uh, and that's a uh, expression of the labor aristocracy thesis. Uh, was that it? Kind of, the influence of it, in particular in the AFL, in the skilled trades, or was it the suppression of the left in the various Red Scares, beginning with the Palmer raids up through the McCarthy period? What in the Sam hell happened, in your opinion?
I think, Joe, when we had the organizing drives led by Foster in the 1920s, and then we had the big organizing drives here in Detroit, where I'm at, in the 30s by the Auto Workers Union, you start seeing, the class consciousness really building on a mass level, and especially with the industrial unionism led by, the CIO, the Communist Party, and the left. You kind of see that all go away with the Red Scare, especially after 47. They targeted communists and left leaders of the labor movement. They made people sign decrees declaring I'm not a communist. And what it really did is it crippled objectively the leadership of our trade union movement, but it also started seeping in ideological poisons. And what you had left were these class collaborationist union leaders in large sum leading our labor movement, putting out ideas of, we're not working class, we're middle class. We'll work with the companies. we got to work together, all these kind of confusing ideas that really over time weaken our labor movement and kind of made us very impotent. So by the time we had, Jimmy Carter and Reagan and the union busting that took place then, our working class was largely ill prepared for when reality set in. So yeah, I would say, the Red Scare in our country was very, very significant.
I would challenge directly the idea that the working class in this country was bribed. I would challenge the idea that there was a labor aristocracy operating. It's an easy answer, but I think that the reasons for the actual conditions that obtained and are current have a complicated history. And in fact, they go all the way back to the Civil War, slavery, and the divisions in the working class. You know, the the fact that uh, some sections of it were unpaid and still haven't been paid. The divisions between black, white, Latino, Asian, Native American, male and female, big sections of the working class underpaid, and so on and so forth. And so we're dealing with a very complicated situation, and simply saying that oh, they just bought everybody off. You know, I'm not I'm not going for that. Um, Scott, back to you. Um, Let me find my place here. Um, Lenin had a very interesting thesis, one of your favorite authors, in What Is to Be Done. Um, and he argues in What Is to Be Done that left to itself, that the working class movement will only develop trade union consciousness, right? And he gave it a name, and the name was economism, right? Economism. And he argued that theory had to be brought in from the outside. And he cited the people who did that were middle class intellectuals, Marx, Engels, Lenin, himself, so on and so forth. His point was that there had to be an intervention from outside, that the working class movement alone, struggling around job security, around health, around working hours, so on and so forth, those kinds of reforms would predominate. Do you agree with Lenin on that issue? I know that's kind of a loaded question. And talk about why is that the case, that it has to be brought in from the outside, and who brings it?
I'm going to start with the second part. Why is it the case that working people don't, in their workplace struggles, spontaneously come to an understanding of socialism and the necessity of revolution and so forth? And this is something that Lenin talks about a lot. He's by the time he writes What Is to Be Done, which is 1903 maybe, he's already been thinking about this for a number of years. And it has to do with the way that capitalist society develops. So as and he's in a situation where capitalism at that point was not yet fully developed in Russia, right? It was still in the course of development. And what was happening was more and more people were becoming workers, that is, moving into the waged workforce. And Also, people were moving around from one factory to another, one workplace to another. And coming to an understanding of their common conditions, not just workers in this workplace fighting against their boss, who was a real jerk, and workers in that other workplace fighting against their boss, but coming to an understanding of class, right? And at the same time, the capitalists were coordinating their power at the level of the state, trying to enforce conditions on the whole of the working class. So Lenin's point is that for the class struggle to happen, it can't just happen, in one workplace or in separate workplaces. The class struggle means that workers as a class confront the capitalists as a class, and the only place that can happen is kind of on the level of the state, right? So this idea of trade union consciousness is related to that idea of um, when the struggle is just happening around immediate demands in your workplace, it can only go so far, right? Because that doesn't bring in the possibility of the mobilization of the entire class around its collective interests. And that idea of bringing theory in from outside, we could also think of it as almost workers needing to be able to take a step back, right, from their immediate workplace issues to think about the class globally. And that's a hard thing to do, right? Because that requires all kinds of collective exchanges. It requires a scientific work of drawing on experience and systematizing it. It requires theory, right? So yeah, trade union consciousness, I think, what we have to take from this is that is the need to move beyond the immediate concerns and demands in any given workplace and see how those fit into the bigger picture of the working class and its collective interests, both nationally and in fact internationally, as Leonard will talk about.
No, the New Deal was not bribery. The New Deal was a series of radical reforms that were won through struggle, through organizing, through
Oh,
strike. People
can I
were
say
shot,
about
killed. 1937, the Little Steel Strike, the Great Steel Strike. Come on, comrade. I mean, please. Um, I think that your point, Scott, that the working class has to understand itself as a class for itself, as a class, and 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 that's an ideological question. It's a question of consciousness. And the influence of socialist and communist ideas in the working class movement. But I want to take another step back, Anita. I don't know. Look, you spent your life as a academic worker, um,
Guilty.
and guilty. By the way, I love your shirt. Los
Thank you.
inmigrantes no son criminales, but the
Pero
president is.
President,
Immigrants are not criminals, but the president is convicted felon.
right.
Anyway, to get back to the point, all due respect to the intelligentsia, to the intellectual. But don't you think that Lenin's thesis would lead to the domination of the middle class intellectuals over the working class movement? Are you comfortable with that? I'm not.
Well, I don't even, I'm not comfortable with the term middle class, really. I think that's an obfuscating term right there. And I think in some ways, I like this division that the concept of economism and how that is holding back the recognition of the unity of the working class. And I think now we see these, I mean, maybe we see the influence of Samuel Gomper's type of unions where they're really only interested in power in one workplace by one finite group of workers, and they don't see the big picture. But I think that really is changing with the way that the working class itself is changing, and academic workers. Some of the best new organizing from the United Auto Workers is going on campuses across the country with graduate students who were always, when in my day they were just worker bees that really were exploited by the university. But now they're unionized workers in many places. So I think that the term middle class really does kind of uh, it's different. You know, there may be more diversity in the working class, and maybe when Lenin imagined that economism being something that infused all the working class, maybe he was thinking about working class, a working class that really was working, you know, had no time or chance opportunity for education or for even organizing their fellow workers. So I think it still is a relevant comment, a relevant concept of economism, and I think it's something we have to struggle against in our unions. That we have to make sure that our unions do look beyond our own contract and our own workplace, but instead look to the impact that our work has on the working class as a whole.
So, okay, now we're getting into it, Cameron. You know, it's getting kind of heavy, and Anita is arguing that number one, this issue of the domination, in part, is a problem of history, in the sense that there was a certain stage in this country when, you know, we weren't able to go to school, we weren't able to get a higher education, and but that's no longer the case, you know. And many of us came from working class families, and we were the first or the second to go to school, and part of the issue is uh, not only that, but we grew up in circumstances in which the communist movement has created the conditions by which a collective political party now is creating its own theory, right? Isn't that true? And we had people like Henry Winston, we had people like Elizabeth Gurley Flynn, we had people like one of your favorites, Bill Foster, you know, who were working class intellectuals created by the working class. Richard Wright, Henry Winston learned to read and write in the Communist Party. You know, that's a hell of a thing, you know. Wright we ought to give him a posthumous, is that the right word? Nobel Prize, you know, that
Absolutely.
great communist novelist, poet. Um, but coming back to the issue of uh, economism, is Anita and Scott right that the source of the problem that we're dealing with is the influence of economism on the U.S. working class? I mean, think about it. Samuel Gompers and John L. Lewis, who was different from Gompers, I think, kind of a center force. Lane Kirkland and them, they're all guard in the AFL-CIO. They're gone. You know, beginning with John Sweeney. Was his name John Sweeney?
Yeah.
A new generation of labor leaders came to the leadership. You have folks who were involved in the anti-war civil rights movement, you know, leading central labor bodies, leading local unions, leading some national unions. And they're doing a good job, a good job. They're good people. Um, they're they're fighting for the rights of their fellow workers and their fellow families to have vacation, to have a job in many cases. Remember the industrial crisis, collapse of steel, auto, electric, so on and so forth. Um, and but they're doing so without a broader point of view, you know, not not necessarily as a class for itself, with its own interests. You hear me? That are irreconcilable with the interests of the monopoly bourgeoisie, if I can use that word. Is that why Trump can cancel collective bargaining rights for over 1 million workers, and the rest of the labor movement, well, not the entirety, but most of them uh, didn't do nothing but make statements, in your opinion?
Yeah, if I could go back really quickly to the previous point about ideas coming into the working class movement from the outside, particularly communist ideas, I think that's absolutely necessary because objectively, through the struggles at the workplace, the struggle against the bosses or even the industries they're in will only necessarily lead to this kind of trade union consciousness. And that's a big kind of hurdle we have to overcome. And I think the communist left should also take some responsibility to be like, why aren't we there in sufficient numbers of forces? Why aren't we reaching these workers with our press, with our ideas, with our cadre, with our organization? And I think too, just a big struggle that's going on here in Detroit, where I'm at, the Cleveland Cliffs steel mill, which has been passed down through different corporations, but nonetheless has produced steel for the Ford Rouge plant, which now builds the F-150. But the workers there, sure, they're mad at Cleveland Cliffs for 500 workers being laid off, and sure, they might be mad at the steel industry in general, but they are not putting the pieces together to be mad at the capitalist system that facilitates these layoffs and these consolidations and monopolization of industry. And only, like Bill Foster said, the left has to do the work, and we have to be there, uniting with the workers and pointing a way forward. That's not just, yes, it's terrible, 500 workers are laid off, and yes, the steel industry is only in service of profits, but what about the nurses? What about the teachers? What about the workers doing telecommunications and so on and so forth? They're all impacted by the same system, which is capitalism. And like Bill Foster said, the left has to do the work, and I think that's what the communists can bring to the struggles, to keep it on course, so the working class can come to be able to take on its historic task of building a new society. On the second question, I think, like you're right, our labor leaders are generally fine people, but we also have to be real and acknowledge that there's instances of rampant opportunism in the labor movement. We have significant labor leaders writing, basically bending down at the knee and writing letters to Trump. Please don't take our jobs. You're a builder yourself. Don't you understand? Like, please give us our jobs. And they're kind of doing it isolated from the rest of the movement and not really seeing the writing on the wall, which is going on. They're going after the entire labor movement, and their biggest target is the private sector. And most of the private sector unions are not speaking up, and if they do, they're just giving words and statements, but they're not involved in struggle. At our Labor Day, the AFGE president Everett Kelly gave a really good address and made it very clear they're going to come for AFGE first, but tomorrow they're going to come for you guys. And it was really sad to see that, we had thousands of people, but a lot of the workers in private industry, a lot of the unions were just, eating their hot dogs, hanging out, having conversations, and not really listening to the message. And I think, really it's a crisis of our unions and our leadership not taking it seriously. One, organizing unorganized workers, of course, we're not seeing that in good enough numbers, but also reorganizing the workers we do have. The workers in existing unions need to be reorganized. They need to be remobilized. They need to be repoliticized. There's a complete lack of political education, a lack of, they'll say solidarity, but why is it that the letter carriers are out rallying against privatization by themselves when the other unions are just taking the weekend off? There's got to be a breaking point, or at least a point of departure for us where we're like, okay, we need to get all of us together and make a fist and strike a blow and start fighting back and fighting forward and not just playing defense.
It's you made the point quite well, quoting the AFG president, who I think borrowed that idea from James Baldwin. Jimmy Baldwin wrote a letter to Angela Davis, Anita, in which he said,
Mhm.
if they come for you in the morning, they're coming for us at night, you know? And so the AFTRI president was saying to the industrial unions and other unions in the private sector, auto workers, electrical workers, machinists, so on and so forth, carpenters, y'all don't know what you're dealing with, you know? This is
Mhm.
this is getting deep. Um, and the situation has changed, you know, significantly from, for example, when I was coming up, there's been a growth in class consciousness, Anita.
Mhm.
When I was coming up, I remember my dad and them talking. You know, he was a steel worker, and they would talk about the teachers and the nurses, and both groups at that time, sections of the working class, saw themselves as professionals. You know, saw themselves as a little different than, folks who were working in the mill or out at Lordstown and General Assembly. And that's no longer the case. Now, your section of the work, professors unionizing, doctors unionizing. So the ground is fertile. Now, Scott always likes to make the point that the role of the party is to place a working class stamp on the struggle for democracy, right, Scott? You know? Uh, but you need class and socialist consciousness in order to place that stamp. That's the essence of placing that stamp, isn't it, Anita?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that idea of professionalism, the idea that teachers and doctors had some kind of technical knowledge that set them apart from ordinary workers, I think that's really an old idea that's losing a lot of steam these days. And I think that you're right. Unionization of teachers and doctors. I have a friend who's a doctor, and they're in a union, a an effort of workplace organization, and it seems to be the same issues of salary and workplace conditions and safety and scheduling and the same kind of efforts to have a life that is not just in service to profit. So I think it is a change in the working class that is enabling us to maybe get a little broader unity. But I think we still have to make sure that those forces, those so-called professional unions, don't overtake the working class, the labor movement. And keep in mind that it's a labor movement, not just trade unions, but also people who are unorganized, people who are unemployed. All of these elements of the working class have to be taken into account as part of the big picture of the working class.
Scott, you want to jump in on this? I mean, this go for
Yeah.
it.
I actually want to circle back a little bit to this question of the labor aristocracy, and the bribe, because I think it's relevant here. So when Lenin talked about the labor aristocracy, he did so in the context of imperialism. And what he argued was not that the entire working class of the United States or of the, you know, advanced capitalist countries was a labor aristocracy. What he was arguing was that uh, the ruling class um, tries to bribe a certain small section of the labor movement in the advanced capitalist countries, that it tries to bring to offer these sort of cushy deals to a certain small section of the labor movement to get them on its side and to spread that, those bourgeois ideas in their organizations. And I think we have to, again, I'm sorry to keep drawing this back to the role of the ruling class, but I don't think we can lose that from, right? We have to keep that in mind, because it's not just that, workers fell under class collaborationist leadership, or they failed to see the big picture. there's a very concerted campaign to make it impossible for us to step back and see the big picture. And part of that involves imperialism. Part of it involves the maintenance of conditions of exploitation of other nations by capitalist nations. It involves the difference between the conditions of the working class in, um, for example, in underdeveloped countries or in developing countries in the third world compared to the conditions of the working class in the United States. That difference contributes to confusion. It makes it look like U.S. workers are profiting from from capitalism in the United States, when in fact it's that we've been spared some of the worst and most brutal facts of capitalism up until now. Racism in the United States works the same way, right? To divide the working class, to make it seem like there's a section that's somehow benefiting from this system when it's not. So putting the working class stamp on this movement means, or on the struggle for democracy, means being able to see the interests of the entire class and being able to recognize those traps, those lies, those attempts to impose ruling class ideas and interests on our movement. We have to keep in mind that the role that history has set out for the working class is not just to win its own liberation. The kind of core of Marxism is that when the working class struggles for its own liberation from exploitation under capitalism, that struggle against the capitalist class can become the driving force for all movements for progress and democracy. Right? The working class is in a unique position in capitalism, not as the only force that demands democracy, wants it, certainly not as the only force or group facing oppression, but one of our comrades says that the working class has an empowering responsibility to struggle for democracy. And I think that's where I'll leave it.
An empowering responsibility to struggle for democracy, which means to unite the different sections of the class, Black, white, Latino, Asian, different genders, recognizing that fight for unity is necessary in order to bring the whole class forward. And every section of the class has an interest in doing so. Cameron, I'm coming to you. I see you want to jump in.
Yeah.
What is to be done? How
What
can
is
we
to be
move
done?
things forward? How do you build power in the unions? And can you do that without a bigger and stronger Marxist and communist left?
Well, first I'd like to go back to something Scott was pointing out, and I just wanted to add to that, because these corporations are international, that requires us to have an international mindset, especially the trade union movement. And that points to the significance and high importance of federations like the World Federation of Trade Unions, who are celebrating their 80th anniversary founding in Paris this October, and really highlighting that the problem of capitalism and imperialism is not necessarily, it is a national struggle, but it's also an international struggle. And I just wanted to highlight that, because we need to organize internationally and nationally in order to effectively fight back and fight forward. On the question of what is to be done, I think, obviously we have to fight for the most immediate demands of our class. We have to fight against layoffs. We have to fight for more of our free time, a shorter work week, of course, with automation and new technology entering the fold at rapid rates. We have to fight for unity of our class. And to do that, we have to be involved in the labor movement as the Communist Party. And we need a bigger, more effective mass Communist Party to do that. And without that, the pitfalls will keep reoccurring of just trade union consciousness, just opportunism, and so on and so forth. And I think with the fighting on the immediate demands and organizing new unions, sure, they're not necessarily a socialist struggle, but objectively it positions our class to gain the lessons and gain the organization and gain the unity to take on more advanced demands and eventually the political struggle. So, these struggles against layoffs, like I mentioned, Cleveland Cliff, the party here is really trying to push that and fight against that, and that is really important. And then, but the thing is, once these jobs come back, if we can win these jobs back, we don't stop there, right? We catch our breath, it's a victory, and then we fight forward. What is the next thing to be done? And as we keep building and building and our organizational capacity and power grows as a class, then we can start taking on more advanced demands and fighting strictly on anti-monopoly lines, fighting for an anti-monopoly democracy, for instance, as our party program says. But until we organize workers, organize the party, and reinvigorate our trade unions, including running for union office, getting involved in central labor councils, getting resolutions passed, all these things will add up to be a significant qualitative change in the labor movement, where we can begin fighting forward stronger and more united.
Well, we got a big job in front of us, y'all. And Cameron and his comrades are doing a stand up job at doing that job. They just produced a new labor pamphlet. Can you see it? Labor's Fight Back. It's going into its second printing. And you can get it, just by writing us at CPUSA. No, what's the address that we need to send it to? You have to send, well, you can send it to CPUSA at cpusa.org,
Yeah.
or you can write to, does the Labor Commission have an address,
Yeah,
Cameron?
Labor Commission at cpusa.org.
Labor Commission at cpusa.org, and we will send you this new labor pamphlet, and we want you to read it and give us your comments. We're going to end with a question from our listening audience. I think it was last week, and it has to do with whether or not the party's legal, I think, in the United States. What is the legality of the Communist Party in these United States? And what are or have been its legal troubles? Anybody want to take a shot at that? Are we illegal?
I'll jump in and say, we always think of things in terms of a struggle, and our position is that we have a right uh, to participate in the political life of this country as a legitimate, legal, open party. And that right has been contested and denied in many ways. But we've also won victories. So there have been laws that try to make the party illegal. The Supreme Court has generally refused to enforce them, refused to consider them constitutional. But our leaders have been jailed, and it's an ongoing struggle, right? Especially now under fascism, as fascism gets closer.
Anita, Cameron, anything
Well,
you want to
I would
add?
I would say if you want the what have been the legal troubles of the Communist Party, I think that would take a long that would take books because there have been so many legal efforts to oppress the party, to repress the party. And I think also, I don't know, I'm not a lawyer, I don't know the legal ramifications, but I think states have different rules about who can be on the ballot and what parties can be on the ballot. And that may be another aspect of legal, our legal issues, but I don't know the details of
Okay.
that.
Cameron, anything? You
Well,
don't have
you
to
know,
if you don't want to. It's a free
I
country,
just yeah, I just know historically, of
more or
course,
less.
the Smith Act, the Who Act trials, the jailing editors of the Daily Worker, sending Winnie to prison, Gus to prison. You know, obviously the legality of the Communist Party has been contested by the ruling class. They've tried to silence us for over 100 years, but we're still here and we're still fighting and kicking ass for the working class.
Okay, here's what a lawyer said to us in answer to this question a few years ago. They said that the Communist Control Act was passed in 1954, almost unanimously. That was during the height of the McCarthy period, supported by most liberal legislators in the Senate. The act did not exactly make it illegal to be a member of the party. It was meant to supplement the Internal Security Act of 1950. Um, but um, in the 1970s, the federal court in Arizona ruled that the Communist Control Act was unconstitutional. You hear me? Unconstitutional, and could not bar a candidate of the party from running in the general uh, elections. It has not been appealed, and therefore that is final. So no, it is not illegal to be a member of the party. And yes, uh, they did use it to suppress us, but the federal courts have ruled that the Communist Control Act is unconstitutional. And in addition, some unions had anti-communist clauses in their constitutions, but that was abolished by at least the international AFL-CIO under the John Sweeney leadership. And we are fighting for the complete open legality of the Communist Party, and we're going to continue to do so. Well, we have had an interesting discussion this morning. Thank all of you once again. Speaking of repression, we would be remiss if we didn't mention the shooting yesterday of Mr. Kirk and the uh, enormous vitriol and hate that is coming from the MAGA right, led by the Oval Office itself. We do not agree with political violence. We do not agree with assassinations. We do not agree with acts of terror. We think that only brings about conditions of greater repression. The problem are not individuals. You can't solve it by eliminating individuals. The problem is systemic, and our goal is to change fundamentally the system. And the only way that you can do that, we've been arguing about this all morning, is by mass, public, uh, demonstrable pressure, by the working class and the broader public to make that change possible. And we in the Communist Party seek to do that by non-violent means. We are not advocates of violence. And you see what's happening, and it happens over and over again. You know, they're using this. Now Trump has said, I'm gonna go after all of the left, whether they're in the university or whether they're in the mass media or whether they're in the classroom, you know, or whether they're being supported by and funded by others, and this, they're trying to create an atmosphere that will lead to greater repression. But I don't think the American people are going to go for that, you know? And we have to stand up and fight back, and we need to do it in a way which broadens our reach, involves more people, brings maximum pressure to bear, and use every tool in the toolbox in order to do that. And that means strikes, it means occupations, it means demonstrations, it means running for office. It means collective action. That's the solution to the problem. And it means building a bigger and stronger Communist Party so that we can defeat the influence of economism, so that we can create greater socialist consciousness in the working class, to build the unity of the class so that we can defeat the monopoly bourgeoisie, the MAGA right, and all of their backers once and for all. Well, that does it for this week. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you for your comments. Keep them coming. Subscribe to our channel. And until next week, stay strong, stay safe, and stay in the fight. Thank you, Cameron. Thank you, Anita. Thank you, Scott. Take care. Thank you, producers. And remember, get the pamphlet, y'all. Hot off the press. Labor's Fight Back.